Hi guys, today we're going to be going over security on a Windows machine, specifically hardening the system to make it more difficult for intrusions. The way that we're going to be doing this is going through the different aspects of the computer and changing policies to be much more secure. The first part of doing that is to create an attack plan. Now, an attack plan can be a document, it can be some kind of policy that your company has to make the system more difficult to get access to. But what it is essentially is it's a step-by-step guide for what you have to do to take a system that is insecure and make it more secure. The thing is, your attack plan is never going to be the same on two computers. So unless they're within the same organization, two companies will have two different needs for what the computer is going to need to do to be secure. So, for example, if you're looking at a government computer might have different requirements than some small company. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to follow the plan the same way that it's looking here, starting with user accounts and finishing with policies. But the different details of how you set things up will change based off of the organization that you're with. Now, when I do attack plans, I always keep in mind the company that I'm working for, what the requirements of the company are. Are there any kind of specific applications that need to be restricted, such as remote desktop, which is usually a bad idea anyways, but having a program like remote desktop, and what's the industry? So for example, if you're working in healthcare, there's a big healthcare requirement on all computers in a healthcare profession called HIPAA. And so these types of restrictions are there to prevent patient information from getting stolen. So it's really important to take a look and organize your attack plan based off of what is necessary. The second thing to do is have it easily accessible so that as you are going through, you can check things off and make sure that you stay on track and you don't miss anything. And that really helps to make sure that you get everything done properly. So for the example purposes today, I am going to be doing it on a Windows 7 machine. There's really very few differences between the policies on a Windows 7 machine and compared to a Windows 8 or Windows 10 machine. Windows 8 and Windows 10 use very similar systems. So keep in mind that anything you learn on a Windows 8 machine for the most part does stay relevant when it comes to Windows 10. This, by the way, I don't want anyone to get offended, but I'm a big fan of The Office, and for anyone who gets this joke, I'm glad. So the way that I set up this environment is there's a lot of insecurities built into the environment, and we're going to go step by step and fix those vulnerabilities. Now, this is also the same image that I used as the sample for you guys, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I am going to give you guys the basic information that you need to be able to go through and secure this machine. And again, the rest of it you guys will be responsible for. The way that I've done this is a couple of things. Number one, I've set up some instructions for you guys to follow. So it shows who the authorized administrators are on this computer. It shows who the authorized users are and that no other users are allowed on this system. We're going to remove any malicious programs. Only Google Chrome is allowed as a program for web browsing. Games and media are not allowed on this system. Media players are not allowed on the system, and remote desktop connections of any type are not allowed. And then the rest of it, it's just a very generic and broad harden the system to secure settings. So we're going to go through step by step. Now, what's really cool about these images that I made is that Corpus Christi and the U.S. Air Force worked together to create a score report, and this is used commonly by students in the Cyber Patriot competitions. And what's great for us is that I can teach you guys how these different things work, and as we start making changes to the system, you get graded on the score. So this way you guys will not only learn what the system changes are, but also get points every time you do that. So what we're going to start with is the first step on our attack plan, which is to change user accounts. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the start menu, go to control panel, and from control panel, we're going to go to user accounts and family safety. And here you're going to have the user accounts menu. Now, as long as you're an administrator, you can manage other user accounts on the profile. And so what we'll see here is that, again, Michael, Jim, Dwight, Pam, and Andy are the only authorized administrators. And if you guys are fans of the Office, Pam is the office administrator, which is why I added her there. I hope you guys got a little chuckle out of that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take the account for someone such as Angela here, and we don't want her to be an administrator, but she is allowed to be a user on the account. So what we're going to do is we're going to not delete her account, but we're going to change the account type. And we're going to change it from an administrator to a standard user, which whenever you choose to change the account type, it'll automatically do that. And as you go through, you want to manage other accounts, and you want to keep doing more and more until you get all of the accounts to the specifications that you need them. Now, another thing that I'm going to do is once I've changed the account type, I also want to make sure that this person has a password on their account. So by creating a new password, right, I can just type in password for now. It doesn't really matter. Once I put in password, what's going to happen is the account is now password protected. And if I try to change accounts, and if I log off and I switch user and I go over to Angela's account, here you'll see Angela's account. I'll need to put in that password, and what the company will do is they'll probably say, you know, this is your temporary password. Make sure you change your password when you log in. So that's a really important policy to have as well. So you want to make sure that there's a default password that you give them, and then require those users to change their passwords. But once I make that change and I give her a password, now if we open up the score report again, the score report's going to be updated, and sometimes this does take a while, and so just be aware that a change that you make might not show up immediately. So what I do is I keep this window open in the background, and it'll update as it registers with it that we made the change to it. Okay, now the next thing is, so now we've changed the password, we've changed the account type, and what we're going to do is we're going to disable any unauthorized user accounts. So if we go back to the instructions, the only ones that are allowed on here are Angela, Creed, Daryl, Kevin, Kelly, Meredith, Oscar, Phyllis, Ryan, Stanley, and Toby. All right, so this is essentially the main cast of the TV show. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into those user accounts and family safety, and we're going to take a look to see if anyone in this account doesn't belong here. And looking, what you'll notice is that you'll have the Scranton Strangler, and you will have Todd Packer, and these guys aren't allowed. So what you do is you click on the account, and the thing is as an IT professional, you don't want to delete the account. And the reason for that is because if you delete the account, there's a possibility that you are deleting evidence. So you want to make it possible so that the account can be investigated to see how it existed there in the first place. So what we're going to do for now, because there's a different way to disable this account, is we're going to go into the account and make it a standard user. So until we get to the point where we can disable this account, at least this person no longer has admin privileges. And so we're going to also do the same thing for Todd Packer. And we're going to change the account type as well to standard user, and we're going to give both of these accounts passwords, because let's say a hacker maliciously put these accounts in there, we don't want them to be able to get access to make themselves administrators again. So we're going to go ahead and put this on here, and if you notice, I really shouldn't be allowed to be able to make a password that's just password, but we don't have any account policies that say that we have to make a more complicated password, and that's what we'll get into in a little bit here. So we're going to go ahead and put in these two as passwords. So now they're both standard users and they are password protected. So we'll go into that in a second. And then disabling a guest account is really important. What can happen is a guest can accidentally get put into an administrator list as a group, and you don't want someone with a guest account to have that, and it's just bad policy. So what we could do is we could go here and just turn off the guest account. So now that we do that, the guest account is there, but it's not turned on. And so that's another way to harden your system. So once we've done that, now the last part is to rename your administrator account. And this is because you can brute force, as we did in the pen testing clinic. If you know that there's always going to be an administrator on every computer, and there's a likelihood that that administrator is going to be called administrator, there's a very good chance that you can brute force that and try to get access to a computer system. So we can change this name to whatever we want, right? And you want this to be something that's a little bit tricky for anyone to figure out, but anything other than administrator or admin will usually give you a pretty good idea. So like, let's say we call this one leader. Doesn't really matter, but this way now we've changed the administrator account, and also we want to go ahead and create a password for this account as well. All right, and now when we take a look at our score report, we've gotten a couple of scores here. Angela has been changed, given a password, as well as it's going to show that we've disabled her account, changed her account to a standard user. All right, so now that we've done with just the basic stuff of user accounts, and again, I will get into, once we get into these policies, how to get rid of those accounts that are not authorized, we want to go through and make sure that the firewalls are set to the right standards. So the way that we do that is we go into Control Panel, and in Control Panel, we're going to go into System and Security, and we're just going to click on Firewall. And it's very simple. This is your Action Center. The Action Center will tell you to just use recommended settings. And when you do that, it'll automatically turn on your firewall and put up the basic, the default policies for the firewall. Okay. And once that's done, there's a couple of things that we want to do. So once we turn on the firewall, we want to enable notifications. What a notification is what it'll tell you when a program is blocked by your firewall. Okay, so we go into the change the notifications, and what we want it to do is we want it to notify whenever Windows blocks a firewall, both for public and for the home group. And this is important because sometimes firewalls will accidentally ignore block a program that's essential, and you need to be able to identify what that program is without having to do a lot of research on it. So whenever, for example, if you're working at a help desk and someone says, hey, my program's not working, you can ask them, when you try to click on it, what does it say? And it says, oh, this program is blocked by the firewall. So that makes your life a lot easier as any kind of like help desk or system admin to know where the problems are. All right, so we've enabled notifications, and now we've got to configure rules. Now, what firewalls are either hardware or software implementations that take a look at network traffic and decide what is allowed and what is denied. And that's based off of the configuration rules that exist on your firewall. Now, the way that we do this is we go into advanced settings. And here you're going to get a lot of different things going on. Okay, so we want to go and check in your inbound and outbound rules. Now, by default, you typically want to block all inbound traffic. You don't want to have other things from outside connecting in. And when I say inbound traffic, this is what I mean. You have connections going outside of your network. Okay, so let's say I have my company here. Okay, and so my company has a connection that it's trying to get to on the World Wide Web. Okay, and what's going on is this is a public domain, and whenever you're dealing with the public, there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there and there's a lot of bad stuff in there, right? So you want to make sure that and I'm doing this with the mouse, so excuse me if it's kind of messy. You want to make sure that the public can't get access to your company, but you want to be able to access. So anything going outbound by default is typically allowed, and then anything going inbound, which is outside coming in, is not. And there's more advanced firewalls that can happen, such as the demilitarized zone, a stateless firewall versus a stateful firewall. Firewalls get really complicated because they're essential for the security of a company. They're the first line defense for people coming in, and there's multiple stages and layers of firewalls to protect your organization. So by default, we don't want things coming into our network. So things like BitTorrent, right? And again, the instructions say that you're not allowed to have anything but Google Chrome. So we want to go through and disable these rules. And again, don't delete the rules so that way we can do more work on it. Now, Google Chrome is allowed. However, things like remote desktop, it said is not. So we're going to go through and we're going to disable anything that says remote desktop. Now, the difference between a remote desktop and a remote assistance is often used by companies to be able to log in and assist, but it's different from desktop. Desktop connects to a server, whereas remote assistance works a little bit differently. So you also want to turn off the Telnet server. Telnet is an unencrypted access to your files, and this is an older technology. It was replaced recently by Secure Shell and then recently by TLS, if I'm not mistaken. So Telnet is the worst out of all of them, and you definitely want to disable this. As well, it says no media player allowed. So go through and you disable your media player. and your media sharing networks, and you just want to go through and disable anything that isn't allowed for your system. Then you want to take a look at your outbound rules and make sure that nothing in your outbound rules really violates any of your policies. Again, we have remote assistance that's allowed, but not remote desktop. The Windows Media Player, again, should be disabled by default. So now that we've configured the rules, let's take a look at our score report and see if we've gotten any points. And we do have some points. We got some points for firewalls, and again, more will populate as the time goes on. Now, the next thing on the attack plan is to allow programs and features through the firewall. So this is another way of disabling things that you don't want. We don't want BitTorrent to be allowed through our firewall. So we're going to uncheck BitTorrent. And make sure that it doesn't go through the firewall. We also want to not allow remote desktop, so you want to make sure that that's disabled. And the telnet server, and since we did that through the firewall configuration rules, I believe it took care of it over here. Okay, so click OK, and now we're done with the basic firewall settings. There's still a little bit more advanced stuff that we're going to get to, but we're going to get into that once we get into the policies. All right. Next, we're moving on to removing programs, features, and tasks. Now, if you guys remember in the malware removal and the computer cleanup tutorial I did, Malwarebytes is an amazing tool for cleaning up systems. But if you look, this is a company computer. There's multiple company users on this computer. And Malwarebytes is not allowed in a corporate environment unless you pay for it. So we can just assume in this situation that it is not installed, it is not paid for, therefore we can't install it and use it. Now there's a couple of things on here that are not allowed. So obviously BitTorrent is the first one. Let's get rid of that. And if you guys remember from the computer cleanup, ByteFence is considered a type of malware. So go into and when you're uninstalling BitTorrent, also remove the settings. You also want to uninstall ByteFence, right? Because this is a potentially unwanted program. I don't know if this is legitimate anti-malware or not anymore, but I know that typically what happens is when you install some kind of product, this tends to install along with it. So it's considered an unwanted program. Again, that unwanted programs don't necessarily mean malicious. It just means that, hey, I didn't authorize it to be installed. All right. So once this is being removed, then the next thing is going to be, and the Cyber Patriot scoring engine, please don't remove this because otherwise you guys will lose the ability to see how you're doing. But we are going to remove the Web Companion. The Web Companion is, it's another one of those adware things, and this is really, really genius the way they did this. They're making it seem like this is leaving your computer vulnerable by getting rid of the Web Companion. So you just want to click I'll take the chance. And again, this is adware as well. And then finally, you want to get rid of the Web Discover browser. And this is the toolbar that sits on the top. And so we are getting rid of that. And again, this is a pretty annoying program as well. So this is removed from the computer. And it's a good idea once you've done some removing to restart your computer. I'm not going to do that now, but that's something that's a pretty good idea to do. So now that we've gotten rid of the malicious programs, we want to get rid of those tasks. So every time I turn on the computer, that idiot message from Dwight pops up. Now the way that you get rid of a task is you go into your control panel again, and you go into your system and security, and there should be something on here for tasks. Let me see where it is. Administrative tools and task scheduler. Now, there's certain tasks that are legitimate. What tasks are commonly used for in Windows systems is to do the things that are mundane automatically. So as a company, you can create a task to automatically back up your systems or to automatically check for updates. And so some tasks are legitimate. And if we go into this task library, you'll notice that some of these are legitimate. Google Update, this will trigger every time, repeat every hour for the duration of 1 day. But this task is the one that was created by Michael Scott, and this is unauthorized. So again, we're not going to delete it. We're just going to disable the task. And now whenever we turn on the computer, it won't give us that message saying idiot. Okay? And once the malicious tasks are done, now we want to change file permissions. So let's say we don't want anyone to see what the file permissions are on this. File permissions are to prevent unauthorized users from getting access to a certain file or folder. So the way you do this is you go to Properties and you go to Security. And then what you want to do here is you just hit the Edit button, and this will allow you to change properties. And what you can do is you can add a user or you can remove a user. Okay, so we want to give Jim access to this. So what we're going to do is hit Add, and then just type in the full username, which is Jim Halpert, and click Check Names, and it'll automatically fill the information here. So once you do that and you hit OK, now Jim Halpert, and again, the different systems will have different features. We're giving Jim the access to read and execute, as well as read the file. He can also modify the file if we want to give it, and then that gives him the write option, and give him full control, which gives him access to everything. Now, vice versa, if we want to deny everything, we can just click deny, and now Jim, although he's an administrator, doesn't have the authority to read and access this file. So that's how you set up the file permissions on the Windows system here. So it's a little bit different on different operating systems, but this is in particular for Windows. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just apply this, and it's just saying that we want to make sure that we're applying the deny policy here. All right, and so once we set up some file permissions, and we want to turn on the automatic updates. Now I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want it to install updates, but I will show you guys where to go to do that. So you go to Control Panel again. Okay, and then in the control panel there is the option for system and then Windows Update. And so Windows Update is currently turned off. When you click turn on, it will automatically download the updates and install them as necessary. So this is important. Again, patches are the way that operating system developers can give you the latest security so that you aren't vulnerable to the known threats on the market. So as annoying as they are to download and install, they're a very essential part of the process to secure a computer. Now, once that's done, we get to the bulk of what securing a computer is about, which is policies. Now, policies are essentially security settings that are in your computer that determine how things work. Okay, so to get to your policies, you hit the Start button, go to Control Panel, and then go to System and Security. Now, in here, you're going to have a couple of options. The first thing that you want to do is you want to go to Administrative Tools, and you want to go into the local security policy. So there are other things in here. Once we're done with the local security policy, we're going to go into firewall and advanced security, but let's go to the local security policy first. Okay. In here, we're going to start off with the account policies first. Now, the account policies have a couple things on here. The password policy says a couple of things here. So enforce password history. It says how many passwords does it remember. So if you guys have ever worked at a job where you're required to change your password every 120 days or every 90 days, and it says choose a different password because you've already used this one before, that's what this policy is. And by default, most companies will put it at 5, so it'll remember your last 5 passwords. Your maximum password age is how long it will be until your password expires. And this is typically going to be at 90 days. Sometimes companies, for administrators and really high value people in the company, will put this at 30 days. It's a little crazy, but some companies, especially defense contractors, will do that. Then the next one is the minimum password age, which is how many days before a password can be changed. A lot of companies like to put this at 30 days, and the reason that they do this is because once a password has been changed, unless a system admin goes through and does an actual password reset request, what this is for is to prevent hackers from getting in and changing your password immediately after you change it. So that's an important policy as well. The minimum password length that's recommended is 8 characters, and this is so that it's more difficult for anyone to guess it. Again, based off of your industry, you might want to change this. For example, if you're working in defense contracting or healthcare, you most likely want to put this at 13 characters. But for most computers, 8 is enough. I know at jobs that I've worked at, they've usually just required 8. The other thing is this password must meet complexity requirements. This is, does my password need uppercase and lowercase and symbols for it to be an approvable password? That way, things like password or password one or dictionary words will typically be not allowed by this system. And that's to prevent attacks from like a password list like we covered in penetration testing. The last part is store passwords in a reversible encryption. And so Windows stores their files on what's called a SAM file. And that's your, I think it's security account management is what it stands for. But if you store it in a reversible encryption, that means that anyone who has access to your computer can essentially get their way into the SAM file, get the SAM file, and use a program like Offcrack to crack the password in that file. So you want to disable this because then it makes it so that that password can't be decrypted. Next is the account lockout policy. So the lockout policy, the way that this is designed is after how many invalid attempts are you going to lock me out from logging into the computer? And most people are familiar with this with their iPhones or their Android phones. So if you enter a password so many times, it says, please try again in 30 seconds or please try again in 5 minutes. So we want to set this threshold to 5. Typically 5 passwords. If you don't know it after 5, you're most likely trying to brute force guess the password. And then the lockout duration, most companies will set this for 30 minutes, which will usually require a call to the help desk to verify that it's a valid, someone just forgot their password. And you're done with your account policies. After that are your local policies. Now, with local policies, what you're doing is you're setting the policies for the computer itself. There is another type of policy, what's called a group policy, and that's typically the policies that you would do to an entire group. This is really important when you're setting up domains and Active Directories. And the reason for that is if you have a company that has a large amount of computers, you're not going to want to deliver all of the individual security policies one computer at a time. So if you've got 300 computers at a company, you don't want to go through 300 computers of configurations. So what you do is you create a group policy, and everyone belonging to a certain group would get all of the rights of that group. Now, in this situation, though, we're just pretending it's a small company, and we're going to set up some kind of local policies. Now, the first policy we do is an audit policy. With an audit policy, what we're doing is we're logging whenever things happen and whenever they work and whenever they don't. So for example, we're auditing logon events, and what we want to do is show success or failure and then just apply. And you just want to go down through all of these policies here and then either show success or failure. And the failure is really important because, again, when someone is trying to get access to a system, they're probably going to fail a couple of times. And that's going to leave logs within a system. And one of the parts of a successful penetration test is to try to remove signatures that you were there, and that's through the logs. So the better logging you have, the more chances that you can trace back one of those intrusion attempts back to the original system. So then after an audit policy and you set everything to success or failure, you're going to go into here. And here there's a couple of things that you want to make sure that you're doing. One of those things is, let me take a look. This one, I'm sorry, in the user rights administration, there's nothing that really needs to be done. But in the security options, there is. So on top of renaming the administrator directly through the user accounts, you also want to rename the administrator through this security options because, again, it's stored in a different area. And then you also want to rename your guest user. So we can call the guest user, usually what I do is Ghost. Again, it's up to you. And again, you don't want to use something too often. You want to make sure that your guest account is disabled. And you also want to disable your administrator account because it's easier to make a user an administrator and you can log and edit that much easier. And so you want to do that here. There's a couple of other policies on here that you can do. For example, log like global system objects, log, audit the use of backup and restore privileges. And so each company, again, will have different logging that is necessary in here. But typically what I do in here at the minimum level is to disable your administrator and guest accounts and then rename your administrator and guest accounts. But there's a lot of different things, and I do recommend taking some time to go over these different types of policies because it's really great to know what each policy is for. So once we're done with the local policies, the next one is the Windows firewall with advanced security. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go, and if you notice, the domain profile is not configured, the private profile is not configured, and your public profile is not configured. So you click on the firewall properties, and you want to change the firewall state for all of these to on. And this way, each profile that's on your computer, your domain public or private profile, is set to on. And just like with the auditing, you want to make sure that you do log this. So you can go into settings and to customize and make sure that you display a notification. And you also want to apply the local firewall rules and do the local connection rules. So go through and do all of that, and then you want to log if there's any kind of issues with this. So in this situation, just unclick the not configured, and then it'll automatically take care of the location to do that. The more logging you do, the better, because it gives more data to be analyzed. And so you just want to go through and configure for each profile here. I'm not going to actually do that in this situation because, again, you guys can do that when you're practicing on your own. The last thing I wanted to cover when it comes to these profiles is there is one for computer management. So you'll see right here the computer management tab. And on here, you will have the local users and groups. And if you look at the users, this is where we can disable a user. So the Scranton Strangler, this password never expires, turn that off. And because this is an unauthorized user, you also want to check that the user cannot change the password. You don't want this person to try to get access back to their account. And then disable the account. So you apply that here. You also apply it with Todd Packer. So user cannot change password, account is disabled. And what you're going to do is you're going to go through here and uncheck everyone for that, and then check that the user must change password at the next logon. All right, and then you're going to go through in this situation, the problem is I set the password policies and I changed their passwords through the system. So what you're going to need to do is go through and manage the other account, change the password to something that's more secure because of that policy that I enabled, and it doesn't meet the requirements. So once you do that, then you'll be able to take care of that, and this will add additional securities onto your system. Other than that, that's pretty much it for the computer defense on a Windows system. There is one main difference between a Windows 7 and a Windows 8 and 10. Windows 8 and 10 added what's called a Microsoft account. And Microsoft accounts are synchronized with Microsoft's servers, and they have different abilities. For example, you can download and install applications. The passwords are not stored locally, they're stored remote. A lot of it is cloud-based. And so in those kinds of situations, you don't want individual people to be able to create Microsoft accounts. And in those local security policies and those group policies, there is an option where you can disable a Microsoft account. And that's all you have to pay attention to, is make sure that you don't allow that Microsoft account. We're going to score the report again real quick just to see where we're standing at, and we've got 35 out of the 84. I will be giving the score sheet to whoever's running the cybersecurity lab, and that way you guys can check your answers, and if you're missing a couple, you can go through there. So I hope you guys learned a lot from this, and we will see you on the next tutorial.